So what do you do when you want to check on it? I ask Twitter. Now, thankfully, I got a few Twitter followers, so I got a few responses back to this. But I asked, what is Drupal? Huey had said, I suspect that the general public response would be a blank stare. Lisa Padilla said, Drupal is the content management system we've been promised since Web 1.0. Scott Genson thought it was a Linux distribution. And then somebody thought it was a city in Southeast Asia. Right? So these are real responses that I got within like 10 minutes of asking the question. But I also got some other ones, which were a little more interesting. Sort of like Joomla, but again, totally not. Drupal is the thing that guy talks about when we start to talk about WordPress as a CMS. It's a CMS, like WordPress, only more robust. This can also be more complicated, has a loyal user group, terrible internal search, and blue. Now, the thing is, if you look around, Dig, Facebook, even Reddit now, all social media sites are blue. So it's a way to self-identify, if you will. But Jeremy Wright said it's a platform where it's harder to build simple things, but easier to build complex things. Jeremy's a really smart guy, by the way. And then we get the more standard response you might be looking for: an innovative framework, a content management platform for geeks, striving to become a social publishing platform for power users. Now, I didn't use that term before, but I think of myself as a power user. When I first got on the web with stuff, I was able to, install www.stat. I was looking at the stats. In fact, when I first started a company on South Beach down in Miami, we were running about 50 websites, including Bombardier, the big international company that does Learjet, Sea-Doo, Ski-Doo, on a 46DX33 with about, I think it was about 128 megs of RAM at the time, which was huge. And I wanted to do webmail for all of my community users. And of course, we didn't really have the manpower, so we couldn't do it. But I've always been thinking about what can we do with the technology and thinking like a power user. And I'd really like to be a better part of this community. But going back, social publishing platform, unites content and community. I like that a lot. I think that's really smart. And then of course, an application framework package as a CMS. And then ultimately, Fred is a really smart guy. Drupal is like Lego for building Web 2.0 sites. Just plug together and voila. And because it's open source, it's free. That's the real problem. It's open source. It looks like it's going to be free. That's the problem we have with social media too. When I go in and sell social media to companies, they're like, how much is it going to be? They don't like seeing that price tag. But it takes time. You know that. That's what we're getting paid for, actually. It's not so much in this era where knowledge is free and freely distributed everywhere online. The value isn't in the knowledge itself. The value isn't in the tool or the platform necessarily itself. Although there is some there, obviously. The value is being able to apply that knowledge to unique situations. And that's where I see a lot of people getting money in the Drupal community. That's where I see people getting paid in social media. Bigger challenge, I did a bad transition, sorry, I've been up for several hours. Dries talked about moving beyond the framework to becoming a product, and I really don't think it goes far enough. We need to think about it being a solution. We have been looking at BuddyPress and Drupal and everything else, and WordPress and everything else is really this idea of how can it be everything to everyone? And it can't. And that was one of the first thoughts that I had when I first started working with Drupal. Because I would go in and work with nodes, or I'd work with CCK, or whatever it was when I was working with the different developers over the years. And I'd see how I could manipulate and massage it to make it work in this situation. But if we just used a little bit of different language on some of the fields and maybe labeled things differently, it would have been perfect for a broader situation. It needs to be easy to use, easy to scale, easy to love. Right? It's not easy to love Drupal right now. Everyone know this crossing the chasm model? Familiar? Jeffrey Moore wrote a book, I think it was 91, something like that, called Crossing the Chasm. It was talking about technology adoption. So essentially, I'll walk you through it. We have the innovators at the very beginning, very small group. They're willing to put up with a lot of pain because it doesn't work right. The idea is not baked. It's not together. We move from there into the early adopters, and then between the early adopter phase and the early majority where it really starts taking off, Jeffrey Moore posits there's a chasm. There's this big gap, and it's really hard to get across that gap. And I see Drupal staring at the edge of this chasm right now. And the question becomes, where do you want to go? Because you have the one path, I believe, which is becoming a solution. And you have the other one, which is becoming a framework. And the question is are you going to take the leap, or are you going to fall off the cliff? Are you going to be the bug in Dre's presentation that is still around, but it's not really noticed because it's a little bug? Or are you going to be something meaningful? The Drupal community needs to grow up. I don't mean that in a snarky way or an evil way or a mean way. I mean, just like social media is dealing with, we're at a point of maturation. It needs to become mature. It needs to become something else. It feels as if this is puberty all over again, but it's not. Trust me, it's not. Many technology products have gone through this phase. So with success, we deal with this newfound popularity, all the newbies, all that other stuff. But there's something else I want to talk about more specifically, because it's specific to my problem, and it's specific to a problem we have in social media right now. Has anyone met one of these assholes, douchebags, who call themselves a social media expert? Anyone? There's a few of them out there. Yeah. Well, they're all full of it, and no one's an expert. It's too early for that. People call me that, I cringe. I'm a practitioner. I'm learning every day. In fact, that's why on my Twitter page, the image I have for my avatar is me sitting at a little student's desk to try to get that across, that we're all learners, we're all learning every day. Now the challenge is that these posers and these people who are claiming expertise but don't have it are hurting us. They are really hurting us. They're hurting my industry, they're hurting your industry. And we can't let it go on. There has to be a better way of vetting who knows what they're doing and who doesn't. I have to have a better way of knowing who I can hire. Now I understand from talking to Dries that Acquia has some partner platform vetting that they're doing. That's a step in the right direction. I think there needs to be a broader community reputation system at the core of this, and I'd like to see that built into Drupal.org. I think it's an important part. You know, I think there's a challenge with a lot of my friends in the open source community who start looking at commercial applications. As soon as it becomes about money, it's no longer about the passion or the original purpose, right? So we got to kind of get beyond that. In fact, the term I use when I'm looking at communities now is markets. And I'm not talking about like stock markets, although that's a form of a market. I'm talking about like the original market, the souk, you know, back in the silk trade days, where people came together and they talked with one another and they exchanged ideas. And it was as much about the story of how the product was made as it was about the transaction haggling over price. And we have another problem, which is that there's more people that need to be involved. It's very simple. We need to look at each other and say, who needs to be involved? Whose voices should be heard? Now, for the last 15 years, all I've heard from the leading edge of developers that I work with is we need to be more user-centric. So I guess there's a fundamental question here. Who is the user of Drupal? Is it me, as an organization chief, who's looking at actually deploying it? Or is it you, the developer, who's doing the coding? I contend it's both of us. And we need to be more encompassing when we're looking at who constitutes our community, who constitutes our market. We need more honest about how that market needs to function. And we need to have a vision for what it is that we want to achieve out of it. So we stand at the crossroads, which is why we ask these questions and why we must look in the mirror and answer them honestly. It really does take a village to look after the whole of the community, not just the one part of it, but to look at the whole thing. And every now and then you need to step outside of your day and look at the whole of the community and see what's in the greater interest.